Okay, well, much of what you will hear from me comes from a book, my book, which I've written called The Cosmology of People and the Time Travel Solution. Now, we're not actually going to talk about time travel Doctor Who style, but a different form of time travel, which we'll come to. The reason why I'm here is that I have a great interest in getting into space, for humans to expand into space, but there are some problems. There are technological problems, there are economic problems. Capitalism, the way it's organized, doesn't really look as if it's going to get us into space. But there's also a psychological problem. We are very confused about space, what it means, why we're doing it, how we're going to operate in space, what's going to happen to humanity, as it evolves into space. I mean, good old Timothy Leary, sent to 20 years to Folsom Jail for possession of marijuana, but had collective hallucination. He'd received this message from aliens. Humans had been seeded by aliens, and that it was our job to develop and get out into space and to go back home. Well, this is, an attitude. Many people have it. UFOs are going to come and take us away somewhere. There are lots of variants of this idea. That's one kind of psychological confusion, I think, in my mind. But there's another one. There's a problem of imagination. We've run out of ideas. We don't know how to innovate. And many scientists and thinkers in this field think that science fiction is going to be the way. There's a group, I don't know many of you have heard of it, it's called Hieroglyph. It's where science fiction writers and scientists are supposed to come together to try and develop ideas and to think, and imagine out of the box. For example, in Berlin right now, today, is finishing a conference. A conference is called The Future in the Stars, European Astroculture and Extraterrestrial Life in the 20th Century. And the whole point of the conference is to try and evaluate the concept of astroculture and how it fits into human history. But the advocates of space travel kind of are very enthusiastic for astroculture, completely without the irony that someone, a space historian like Roger Lonius, who's first page of his paper is there, who noted that, and I quote, "All of the elements of religion are present among those who advocate for aggressive space exploration activities. The belief system has saints, martyrs, and demons, sacred spaces of pilgrimage and reverence, theology and creed, worship and rituals, sacred texts, and a message of salvation with humanity, ensuring its future through expansion of civilization to other celestial bodies." Astroculture that there is today includes an American company, for example, called Celestis, that shoots the ashes of dead dogs into space. It seems to me that that's a little bit of a confusion about what space is, what we need to use it for. We've also sent the ashes of people, mind you. Timothy Leary himself and Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek, have been shot up into space. However, they went into a satellite that's on a poor orbit, and it's since returned to Earth. This problem of astroculture is, confusions of astroculture is perhaps indicated on some of the panels that are up there on the wall, that was sent to me by, or rather the text was sent to me by Andy Thomas, a researcher at Montfort University, who attended in Perth this year the inauguration of a satellite dish, in which there were dignitaries giving speeches, and then there was an Aboriginal representative who performed the Welcome to Country ritual. Now, I don't know if you know the Welcome to Country ritual, but it's where one Aboriginal group welcomes newcomers or a tribe that's passing through, introduces them to all their rituals and various things, and helps them through the country and lets them go with them, carrying the elements of their own, the host tribes, rituals and stuff, so that this other tribe can take them on, to around the land. Quite what this ritual has to do with the inauguration of a passive satellite dish, I don't really know. But also in the same ceremony, 3 Benedictine monks perform this blessing, which is up there. And quite, if there's anybody here who can tell me quite what the theology or philosophy we're really talking about here, I mean, I salute you. It's so confusing that I'm vaguely dumbfounded. This confusion is found even in, for example, February this year, the US White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, along with the Academy of Sciences, co-hosted a look at humanity's future in space called Homesteading in Space, Inspiring the Nation Through Science Fiction. Space scientists, engineers, thinkers and entrepreneurs got together with science fiction writers and creators to examine the idea of future homesteading in space. The White House's specific aims in its press release were to further inform the creative community about a positive vision of a future in space and encourage people to incorporate this vision into entertaining stories that will excite the public, energize entrepreneurs, and motivate and inspire children. Now, there's no question that many people believe that the influence of science fiction is quite substantial on scientific thought. Adam Weigold, for example, a physicist who claims his work on lasers was inspired by the phasers of Star Trek, wrote an article describing precisely this, entitled "Can Futurists Change the Future?" There's Mae Jemison, who was the first female black astronaut in space, claimed that she was inspired to join the astronaut corps by the character of Uhuru in Star Trek. Now, this is a fairly curious position, I think, using science fiction as a spur to innovation, because most of science fiction is actually dystopian or anti-establishment, conveys warnings rather than optimism. Gene Roddenberry may well have briefed the writers of Star Trek to give it a positive future, for humanity, but it was his personal belief, and they're not really a depiction of actual trends. There's viewing television adaptations and movies. A Martian who came down from space would just think, what is going on? Great fuss is made of a current American TV sci-fi series called The Expanse. I don't know if anybody's seen it here. It's where it pictures a future where humans have occupied Mars and the asteroid belt, and yet they live in a dirty, gritty world of space industrialization. It's almost entire nonsense and bears no relation to what's going on today. And somehow the idea that a fresh round of the miseries of industrializations is the best we can come up with for our future in space just fills me with sadness. And it shows here that sci-fi's job to produce narratives rather than truths may not be really very helpful. Positive space advocates are moving from inspirational fact into propaganda, and this is a slightly chilling aspect to this threshold that I'm talking about. They're putting a spin on space activities to encourage a space psychology to further direct industrial development. But if you look back into history, the technique of injecting yearning in people who previously held back by logic and inhibition is as old as the hills. You pick any period you like, say the early Middle Ages, when narratives were freely invented to create saints and to make monasteries viable and to open pilgrim routes. Opening up of the Americas, did we not have El Dorado to drive investment? And were not the pilgrims to Massachusetts deceived by tales of paradise and untouched fertile lands, when the reality was that the grain they brought from England couldn't thrive in the soil? In a way, a precisely similar fantasy was also in play at the beginning of the 20th century in the US, when near-paradise conditions were used to encourage settlers in the Midwest, a part of the country with thin topsoil and unquestionable rainfall, resulted in the Dust Bowl. Jonathan Rabin's book, Badland, in 1997, explains beautifully that how the railroads, in partnership with government, lured people to make their fortune in what was described as free, rich farmland, practically flowing with milk and honey. They printed glossy brochures in lots of different languages and distributed them throughout the United States and in Europe. So when writers ponder fictional future scenarios, well, that's one thing. But when governments get in on the act of persuasion and start unashamedly planting rosy space scenarios in public places, we should begin to wonder precisely what and for whom is at work here. Anyway, I want to lead you in a different direction, but with the same objective, human expansion to space. I want you to think of other ways in which we might use our consciousness to help humans along. In spite of everything you'll hear from me tonight, I am a pragmatist, and I do believe in practical ways rather than fantastical ways to further human interests. There's a purpose often given to the SETI program, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligences, looking for information that's going to help us. But I think there's a different kind of search that I want to introduce you to that may be more beneficial to humans and for which we need the chronolith. We need to know if humans have survived this threshold. The future needs us to make the right decisions here and now, and we need to make them in order to have that future. If the future is to be a success for us, we need to be guided in that direction. And if the future is failing us, we need to know how to avoid making those decisions that lead to failure. Now, if this sounds circular to you, that's because it is. It turns out that probability, which drives the universe, requires circularity. It requires feedback loops through time. For if probability is literally true, then nothing would ever happen. And this is vaguely and perhaps unwillingly admitted by physicists who whisper to themselves about the measurement problem, or even about the notion of the von Neumann cut, which is just where in the system of observer and observed you decide that reality begins. The world is understood through probability, but it's not explained by it. And this is where the chronolith comes in. We participate, the chronolith is going to participate into what I call the fifth state of society. Now we have the four, the hunter-gatherer, the agrarian, the industrial and post-industrial stages. And it is fruitful to think of these stages in terms of how they represent time. For a hunter-gatherer, time is cyclical, social, and immediately fruitful at every point. Agrarian societies have a personal and social time that is cyclical, but also political and requires prediction and weight, and therefore history. Industrial societies' social time becomes linear. That's why we have clocks. For post-industrial societies, time becomes personal, relative, and adjustable. And in the fifth state of culture, we have a space-industrial society where time is social, political, rhythmical, relativizing resources through the interference of needs. The fifth state is where space activity is a pragmatic activity absorbed into our everyday consciousness, and which has begun, or which begins, to define human nature again in the same way that we freshly characterized children who've learnt to walk. The fifth state of culture, humans were making new kinds of decisions through the physics of space and the way space demands new ways of treating, storing, and allocating resources. By moving into space, humanity as a whole engages with a new master, engages in a new dialectic, and thus a new consciousness. Now the chronolith will probe the feedback loops of probability passing into the past from the future, created by the decision-making apparatus of the brain. The coherence of your brain, your happiness and stability, your anticipations and delights always depend upon feedback loops and their self-ignited interference. Summed over time, pathways, even the ones of the past swollen through use, are still mutable. The results will help us understand mind as well as gather information we can put to use here and now. We are looking for an intelligence in the cosmos, but instead of searching the stars for aliens, we're going to search time for whispers from us, from our future selves. The experiment has actually begun. You are here. You are the first to fall within its compass. And it's up to you here that the beginnings of the experiment's world line can be traced in history. You are the first witnesses to these proposals. And if what I believe to be true is true, perhaps some of you will self-select yourselves as components of this fifth state of culture, and will discover and maintain this future trend in the public treasury of data. Your participation here tonight will actually be a fact that people will marvel at. But you will come to understand that it was probably written all along. However, at this moment I'm guessing you think that nothing is written, and there's no such thing as a secular destiny, and everything is down to probability. Well, you're right. Everything is down to probability. But there are more shades to probability than you can shake a stick at. Now, to return to the beginning, if probability behaves as advertised, then nothing would happen, least of all individuality and consciousness. Either the brain is a fully decohered entity, in which case mind would be living entirely in the past, or it can form superpositions and be entangled with states outside of itself. Mind must be entangled, at least in part, with future states of unreality. This is how consciousness makes measurements. We don't have the duality of Descartes, we have interference of states of awareness. And this is how we remember, this is how we anticipate, this is how we escape the mirror of self-reflection. Now, the physicist and cosmologist Max Tegmark has written that we should think of consciousness as a fourth state of matter, along with liquid, solid, and gas. Well, I kind of go along with that. The processing of large amounts of information in complex and irreducible ways is consciousness, and what we call information is just probability. However, and here we are standing at the door of circularity, because probability requires futures to exist, it is probability which is behind the move of matter into consciousness. Through probability, consciousness shapes the energetic surface of life. Evolution is no longer a random walk over a surface of possibilities, it follows channels. The mind makes and is made by decisions that the future has confirmed in their making. I will explain this. The present moment is only a provisional arrangement of states bridging two zones of time. Now, an outside observer sees only chaos, that nothing is written, and does not see how life makes sense from within. The narratives that Billy has produced in the videos in that other room there beautifully explain the kind of otherness within the narrative that we have. See, probability, the interference doesn't really go away even when events happen. It just moves into the shadows. And this is what we're going to take a look at. We assume the past is fixed because we know it happened like that. But it isn't just our memories that help fix the past. Consequences moving along with us help to confirm what happened in the past. You were all here because an invitation sent out weeks ago. But we are here to give witness to the facts that while future is still built on the ashes of today, those ashes are still glowing, they're still burning, still providing options. The arrival of the future doesn't extinguish them. It's the breeze that coaxes them back into narrative life, and hence the Chronolith Observatory. It is a part heterotopia, a place of otherness, but I'm not going to go down that road right now. I'm going to tell you here today how the Chronolith, not how the Chronolith works, but what I expect it to do. I expect it to alter narratives. Now, to better get across what I'm driving at, I'm going to use a literary piece as an illustration. In fact, it's somewhat as evidence too. As an exercise in narrative technique, the author Trevanian once wrote the same story twice for a collection of short stories. If you read one story after the other, they seem to be the same, yet the endings are polar opposites. Now, I knew Trevanian very well, and we were friends, and we talked over this very story. His point about the story was to show how narrative works, and this is very crucial to our ideas of time and time influence. Because you cannot change time or events in time without changing minds. And that if you want to look into the timeline changes that may exist in time, you have to look into minds first. The physical inertia of timeline is too great, and minds have to change as well. Now, the 2 pages from the story are printed up there. And in fact, I advise you to try and find these stories because they're really very interesting. Anyone can use opposite words or negations to create opposite meanings in a tale. I mean, everybody knows the Monty Python sketch about how you're trying to build an argument through contradiction. But Trevanian didn't do it like this. He made opposite endings, or very distinct endings, be convincing psychological conclusions of virtually the same narrative by attending to subtle touches of character. In this case, by altering what may make a person a victim, by attending to what makes us perceive personality in the story, and by attending to what I'm going to call the cosmology of a character. Now, there have been over the years attempts to introduce elective outcomes to novels, television series, movies, or advertisements. It's a nice trend, very confirming of the post-industrial sense of time that I mentioned earlier. Anyone who's ever tried to write these optional narratives, as indeed I have, knows how hard it is to make a narrative strand serve two or more psychological outcomes with any conviction. And the touches Trevelyan makes are quite unremarkable on their own. On the two pages that I put up on the wall, I illustrate the most significant one of all. A thought voiced by one character in one story and then voiced by the other character in the other story. That's the greatest change he made. And if you'd read a story and you were trying to explain it to someone, you'd make many more changes. You'd make many more, make sort of a little bit of elisions, get things wrong, you wouldn't express it quite correctly. You would tell a narrative that's more like a dream. But Trevelyan narrative is much more, you're tending to tiny, tiny little details, which tells us about the minds of the people in the story. And that's how the events become confirmed, because the minds are right and then the events are correct. You can't sort of fiddle the other way around. And in fact, this observation about Trevelyan makes the script that Zemeckis and Gale produced for the first film, Back to the Future. Anyone's seen that? It makes it quite remarkable, because it's one of the few time-traveling tales that gets it, that understands this point about changing the minds. Because his parents are kind of weak in the first story, and he has a life that he doesn't like, but he changes back and he helps the parents become stronger, and the narrative completely changes. It's not about things, but about mind. Now, it's a long jump from Trevelyan's tales to recognize that all narratives, which is to say all consciousnesses, don't live in a field of agreed meaning, and that minds are fairly incapable of retaining consistency of content without our external props. If we took our libraries and our hard drives and our memory chips away, what would we make of memory prediction? It's tough. How would we live in genuine psychological truth? How does human identity remain consistent through time? It may well be that each brain is unique in the physical tracings of its cell structure by virtue of genes and experiences, even though each brain also contains shared cultural concepts and language. But let us imagine another way of characterizing an individual. Let us start by compiling a cosmological view of individuality. Now, the track of an object or a person in Einsteinian space-time is called a world line. We will call the narrative of an object or a person as it interacts with the world lines of others a timeline. And humans live out their lives in timelines. Your timeline contains all those effects of your presence in the world, your influence, but compounded in all the viewpoints, yours and everyone else's, that exist in the volume of time of space, in your volume of time and space. We think our point of view is special, but really, it is only a composite and provisional picture of a cosmology with your consciousness at its center. And after your world line ends, your presence, let us say the proof of your existence, your cosmology, is only retained implicitly in your children, in the repercussions of your actions in the world, or in the objects you have made that survive you. And only insofar as the information these things have released into the world can be traced to you. The cosmology centered on you, for example, has informational limits or a boundary, beyond which no trace of your existence could be observed or calculated. Most of the results of choices we have made are very short-lived and get readily overwritten by the sheer numbers of other world lines. Of the 109 billion people calculated to have lived on the Earth, only the presence of a few can actually be traced to an individual life. And very many fewer individuals could be said to have originated a particular flow of information through a creative act. In this sense, an act that has unknown antecedents. For most of us, the originality of the information we generate is slight, and much simply passes through us from elsewhere. Leonardo da Vinci still has a presence in timelines, even though his world line ended long ago. But the truth is, for most of us, timelines are very much less personal than we like to think. This is what culture means, being imbued with the timelines of others. But it's not really anything of Da Vinci that is present, however. It is the changes produced in sets of events, probabilities for others that he altered through his presence. Now, since these are in principle incalculable, it is hard to see how we could remember anybody, let alone Da Vinci. small shift in probabilities, just like in the Trevanian story, could alter everything. The changes in overlapping probabilities that define our cosmology in the universe eventually die away in time and space. The boundaries of this non-influence could in principle be mapped, such that a conjugate cosmology could be defined that has an absence at its centre, which also overlaps every other cosmology and their conjugates. When we talk of the grandfather paradox, so I sketched out here, which is me going back in time to kill my grandfather so that I never lived, we are talking about the cosmology of me being replaced, if I kill my grandfather, being replaced by its conjugate, being replaced by a different set of probabilities. And thus, in the first Back to the Future movie, the problem of where Marty McFly's dismal world disappeared to when he changed history to create a more dynamic present for himself disappears into a potential, existing as fears or trauma perhaps. There has merely been an exchange of probabilities within the cosmology of McFly. We are better off replacing the word multiverse with cosmology. Instead of the multiverses being separate and distinct entities, unreachable from ours, we should see them as cosmologies, all with us in the same space. An event occurs because it exists within a cosmology that determines its outcome. Because now cosmologies reach forward and back in time, and I will explain this in more detail in a moment. They are connected through time and space for as long as they have distinct values. And thus we reach the essence of the Chronolith Observatory. Individual consciousnesses can, in principle, read their cosmologies extending into the future as well as into the past. And by reflecting upon how we might map the human cosmologies of our universe, we come to a picture rather like the map of the brain. Pathways of probability information flowing and combining, reinforcing and weakening connections in time and space. And the closest helpful image we have is the brain itself. We can form a picture of neurons of time carrying and confirming information, just the way that the neurons of the human brains in this room are doing right now. So what do these cosmologies tell us? Only what we know, that there is a resonance and harmonic, or harmonics, to the universe. Waves are fluctuating back and forth in all dimensions, including time. The arrow of time cannot exist without a place to go or by leaving nothing behind. Zeno's deepest paradox. Shape and rhythm to the fluctuations of energy is intelligence and character in the brain. And in fact, there's been some beautiful recent research describing exactly this. They've taken a three-dimensional scan of the brain and have been able to relate the shapes that the brain can accommodate with characteristics, overt characteristics of the personality behind them. So the picture I want you to take away, one of the pictures I want you to take away, is that the universe is comprised of neurons of information spreading throughout the space-time that the universe occupies through its past and its future. And I want to show you what I mean about these space-time neurons and the spaces, the shapes they occupy with some simple movements. I'm not sure we have enough room. Everyone's seen the Leonardo da Vinci drawing of the man in the circle. Right? The center of this circle is the navel. That was the medieval sort of metaphor that they like to use for the center of things, the navel of the world, navel was the center of the person. But I want to use a different philosophy, Chinese philosophy, which thinks of the heart as being the center of the human being. Now, it's not the sentimental heart of the Western culture. The heart in Chinese philosophy is where all the souls of the body, the 5 souls of the body, are united. It's the full awareness of the person. It's the mind. And I want to do some exercises to try and bring our attention, try to bring our eyes into this part of our bodies. So, because this is the center of our own personal cosmology, reaching out into the world, into the universe. So I was going to do a couple of things. We can just do, there are 2 channels that go from this area of the body out into the world. There's the heart, and then there's also the lungs, which is the entry point of the energy. And
do we need to stand up to this?
Well, you don't have to stand up to it, but I'll just simply say the lung channel starts from here. If you just tap the upper inner part of the arm down to the thumb. Anybody wants to try that? Now, if you're right-handed, you might easily find that you feel slightly bruised at this point. If you do, it's kind of an indication that you're not using your left hand, left arm, left side of your body enough. And if your thumb too is a little bit sore when you do this, it's another indication that you're not really working your left. It's good, yeah. Okay, try the right hand. Give it a good try. Waggle your thumb. That's right. Give it a shake. Now, it would be good if you could stand up for this, but you don't need a lot of... All right? Okay, take your left hand, little finger, just hold it. Take your arm and bring it down behind your head like this. Now this is the heart channel here. And if there's someone that you're intimate with or you're standing next to, turn and touch the inner arm like this. Okay? It's a very nice feeling. I recommend it. That's it. It's good. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Take.
We do it on the other side.
Do the other side. Yeah. Take your right hand. Grasp your little finger. Okay. Bring it round. Give it a good stretch. That's it. Yeah. All right. All right, good. Now, I don't know if any of you know Qigong exercises or Tai Chi or anything like that. There's if you'd like to, a little bit of space where you can stretch your arms out. All right? Stand with your feet just slightly apart. Now, take your arms, cross, bring them up. Now, remember, you're tracing a sphere, not a circle, a sphere. So out a little bit, and then down. That's right. Good. Now bring up, and press down. Okay, once more. Cross that. Up. And push. Breathe out. Great. And then up. And then down. Okay, now this might be a little bit difficult to do, but if you can shake your arms out, but if you have your arms straight, what happens is that your shoulders lift up, and that's kind of tense. What you need to do is to bend your elbows, and your shoulders drop automatically. Think of like a wing. So you're bringing this is the beat of your cosmology from the left and right horizon up to the heart, okay, then down once more. So, again, out, breathe in, now, down. Feel you're compressing the energy between your palms, okay, great. Then up into your heart, that's where the tension is now. Turn your hands out like that, and push out to the far horizon, as far as your mind can go, to where the unknown is. Now, turn your hands like this, back to back, and open the curtain into the new world. That's right. In your hands, collect the energy from the sky, and okay, good. Okay, so this is where you're thinking, right here, spreading out. So now I want to take you to the Chronolith Observatory. It is an observatory whose most significant component is the human mind. The cosmologies of the public are the essential components of the Chronolith apparatus. They lie at the heart of the instrument, and it is they who will establish the composite viewpoint of what the experience means, what the individual experience means. In order to perceive flows from the future, we have to disconnect from our self-regard. We have to enter, however briefly, the anxiety of mortality. Part of the machine is covered by the notion of heterotopia, space of otherness. but it's also designed to offer the chance of this disconnect and to revive, perhaps, the most ancient dialectic struggle for a future. Now, some of the key components of this chronolith. It will involve individuals selected at random. It will be public. It will be secure. It will be culturally agnostic. It will be long-lasting. And its results will get woven into the social fabric. Now, many minds are going to pass through the chronolith, and they will talk to one another and come to conclusions about what they've seen and heard, what has happened, what it all means. And this will go on to form a community as members of the Chronolith Foundation. Now, this membership is forever, and this is a very important point. It's forever, and it can be passed on to children. It is a property that you will possess, and you can use it wisely or not. The Chronolith Observatory is a way of explicitly organizing the perceptions of individuals, the cosmologies of individuals, into usable data. It's not designed, however, simply to observe whether we get across the threshold of space, but it's to read embedded information about all kinds of decisions that we need to make as humans to ensure that we reach the future and to close this loop of influence. We should accept, however, following the arguments I've just given you, each individual cosmology embodies more information about the future than people of the future know about their past. Our predictive capacity contains fewer uncertainties than our interpretive capacity. The gambler knows more about the future outcome of his bet than he knows about why that outcome occurred. Explanations are always provisional, whereas imagining forward, as it were, contains more truth. And this is what we always try to see about ourselves. It is what science fiction tries to do, perhaps, but it's too inertia-filled, really, to be truly useful. The chronolith is going to help us recover new insights and potentials, and it's going to answer, or has the capacity to answer, at least two significant conundrums about our life. The first conundrum is the age-old puzzle of reality. Are we a brain in a vat? Or are we, or to put a modern sort of twist on it, are we living inside a quantum simulation performed by other creatures somewhere? And the second thing is the age-old puzzle of time travel. Can we move about in time? Now, both these notions imply a certain level of fear for people in the future, because there's a fear that any interaction, stuff that we may learn about the future, will adjust our behavior now, and people in the future may be worried about that. However, the chronolith is designed specifically to avoid paradoxical information emerging out into the time stream. It is, in this particular sense, the observatory will be safe for time influencers, or those in the future who try to manipulate the interacting cosmologies I'm talking about to convey information. Now, the first installation will be installed, well, perhaps at the end of this year. The news will be disseminated in the usual channels. There'll be funding campaigns, but everyone here, right now, here, should take that little card with them, because that card has a serial number on it. And if you produce that card in a year's time, you can be some of the first voyagers, if you like, of the observatory. And then, once you've had your voyage, you then join the body of individuals who've had the same experience. So when this chronolith does come on stream, and you take your first voyage, remind yourselves to look around, because you need to recall as much of the past as you'd like, because if the chronolith does work, yesterday for you will be different than today. And some of the things you believed in, the things you were sure of, may possess new qualities. At the center of everything will be the events that confirm the presence of you in the future that awaits. The present only makes sense through the strengthened neurons of the universe, combining in ever-strengthening pathways to action. And this is how we go forward at all, because the future comes to us. So I'll leave you with a phrase. The use of the Chronolith Observatory can be summed up quite simply. We don't have to make time travel work, we simply have to allow it to happen. Now, just to conclude, I want to introduce you to the big secret that lies really at the heart of all of this. I mentioned earlier that your cosmology is reached forward and backward in time. I didn't really explain why this is. Well, why it is because consciousness is unique in the world, in the universe, because it is a system that retains continuously all the interactions that sort of form it as it goes through life. And if you take the inanimate world, particles, they get ejected from something, they get absorbed, things explode into many different things. There are always the changes happening, but there's no record of these changes. An electron absorbs a photon, and there's no record anywhere that it's ever happened, except possibly there's a new energy state, but there's not really a record. Consciousness is very different from everything because it retains continually all the events that happen to it. And this is particularly true of the cosmologies and the coincidences. Whenever you have a coincidence, your brain retains this as it goes on through life. And when you remember it, you are following the train of interference right back to that very event. In the future, when you think about what happened here today, you are actually here today. And what is happening here today is comprised, in part, of all your futures, all the moments in the future when you're beginning to think about that. This is true. Everything in our brain is, everything that we think about, our life, our reality, is just waves in our brain. And they are continually keeping this connection going as we pass through life. Every memory is a moment of contact back in time to when it occurred. The reason why it is slightly different is because you are thinking about it alone. You are not, because an event normally involves a meeting of cosmologies. And what's missing, of course, is the other cosmology, the other person and their life which interacted with you. But your half of it, your interaction, is always in your brain, and it is always contained. So when you remember or think of anything in the past, you're actually going back there. The future connected to the past continually. And this is what the Chronolith Observatory is designed to do. Will produce experimental results and will contribute, I think, to a reassessment of the way we're going to make decisions in the world, and specifically how we're going to make decisions to move out of the world and into the universe, or even to help us decide whether we want to do that or not. So there, I think I've come to an end.